From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Saini Gray. Leaders from Latin America are set to dominate the second day of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, including Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Maduro will likely rebuff accusations by U.S. President Donald Trump and the leaders of the Lima Group. Bolivia's Evo Morales is likely to raise the country's maritime dispute with Chile, and undoubtedly Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel will focus on the U.S. blockade of his country. But before his speech at the United Nations today, Nicolas Maduro responded to new sanctions imposed by the United States. He says he is open to talks with the U.S. president.
I am willing to talk to Donald Trump. I wish if we can arrange a face-to-face conversation between Donald Trump and Nicolás Maduro. Each U.S. sanction, besides being useless, is a medal for the revolutionaries, because it shows that we are brave and we are on the right path. The United States believe they can govern the world. They cannot. The world has changed. The empires are dying, and humanity is on the rise.
Trump had announced these sanctions during his speech to the UN General Assembly.
Today we are announcing additional sanctions against the repressive regime, targeting Maduro's inner circle and close advisors. We are grateful for all of the work the United Nations does around the world to help people build better lives.
And after addressing the UN and meeting with Colombian President Ivan Duque, Trump said his administration is keeping a close eye on Venezuela. He says a military coup is likely.
It's a regime that frankly could be toppled very quickly by the military if the military decides to do that. And you saw how the military spread as soon as they heard a bomb go off way above their head. That military was running for cover. That's not good.
Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has refuted a report that his team was prevented from entering a meeting on Venezuelan migration organized by Colombian officials. He also commented on the state of Venezuelan-Colombian relations.
We have to always consider dialogue between Colombia and Venezuela as a sacred path, and nothing can disturb it, whatever happens. We disagree with what is happening in Colombia. We disagree with the fact there are 7 military bases of the United States in Colombia. And we disagree on the drug production that has increased in 31% between 2017 and 2018, according to UN reports.
President Maduro also announced a plan to legalize more than 8,000 migrants from various countries currently living in Venezuela. At a meeting with the Colombian community in Caracas, President Maduro challenged President Trump to legalize all Latin American and Caribbean migrants living in the United States.
I publicly propose the U.S. government, if they are so much concerned about Latin American migrants, do the same as I have done, and sign a decree to grant every Latin American and Caribbean immigrant citizenship. Now I'll proceed to sign the decree to grant Venezuelan citizenship to 8,381 immigrants from different countries. I signed this decree to legalize and support world migration. Approved.
This as more and more Venezuelan migrants are signing up for the Return to the Homeland plan. In the last few hours, a fourth flight from Peru arrived in Caracas. It brought 93 Venezuelans who say they suffered economic hardship and abuse abroad. The Venezuelan embassy in Lima says it has thousands more on the waiting list. Our correspondent Louis Travera was standing at the Simón Bolivar airport for their arrival in Macuita.
93 people who made the decision to voluntarily return to Venezuela through the Return to the Homeland Plan have arrived here in Caracas. The number of people who have returned has surpassed the 3,000, many of whom raised their voices with allegations of exploitations and xenophobia. This flight came from Peru, where in the embassy of that country there are more than 3,000 requests to return to Venezuela. This will be the third flight from Peru, which in total have brought back more than 400 Venezuelans. Many who now realize the benefits that only exist in Venezuela.
7 months ago, Luis Escalona arrived in the Peruvian capital in search of a better standard of life. Soon, his family came to Peru to join him. In the 3 jobs he had, he suffered abuse and was paid below the legal minimum wage.
In Venezuela, we at least have a house of our own, but here we have to work just to pay for rent.
There, you have free health and education.
Of course, for Venezuelans, education is very important. That is one thing that is expensive here.
Venezuelans who return home agree that the quality of education and health in Peru is much lower than what they were used to in their own country. After facing hunger, abuse, and hardship, they begin to value what they left behind.
We have been surviving, selling in the streets, and it was hard for me because of my health problems.
I couldn't find someone to take care of my children, and I didn't find a school for my oldest child.
I am missing our country a lot. When someone leaves, they don't know what it is to live abroad, and you miss Venezuela.
Almost 400 Venezuelans in Lima have already managed to return to their country through the Return to the Homeland plan promoted by the Bolivarian government. For this 4-plane load, priority was given to 31 clinical cases, 11 pregnant women, 24 children, and 17 family groups. However, the waiting list is long. So far, the Venezuelan embassy in Lima has more than 3,000 registered, waiting for a place to go back to their country.
It didn't go well for me. To be hungry here, I'd rather be in my country.
With all the crisis in my country, I would still rather be here.
The Return to the Homeland plan is being repeated in Argentina, Ecuador, Brazil, and Colombia, from where, every week, humanitarian flights of the Bolivarian government depart to support Venezuelans who want to return to their country.
And we'll take a short break now. More news in a few.
Telesur brings you special interviews with social and political personalities. Monday, from Washington. Tuesday, from Mexico. Wednesday, from Caracas. Thursday, from Quito. Friday, from Havana. Analysis about our continent's reality. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Military facilities in Mexico have been under attack by protesters who are demanding justice for the Ayotzinapa mass kidnapping in 2014. It's now been 4 years since 43 students went missing after being detained by the police in Guerrero. Protesters were seen painting graffiti on the offices of the Guerrero State Department. In December 2014, one of the first missing students was confirmed dead. But today, still, thousands are calling for their safe return and for justice to be served.
4 years after the disappearance of 43 students from the Raúl Isidro School in Ayotzinapa, the relatives take to the streets of Mexico City to demand justice and truth from the authorities and different government institutions.
We haven't found out about any advancements that they have made in the Ayotzinapa case. This is why we're here again in front of the Supreme Court demanding they do their jobs.
They are demanding the completion of an investigation that lawyers consider an example of biased inquiry, which was delayed and unactioned by the outgoing government.
The current government is far from complying with that clear sentence. In fact, it lodged more than 200 judiciary resources against it. As a result, even today, it is still not being implemented.
At the same time, mothers of the 43 participated in a discussion with the Argentinian organization Mothers from Plaza de Mayo and organizations from other countries with whom they share a common objective, finding their sons at all costs.
We have seen the monster's belly and we have decided to fight because we don't want to have one more disappeared child.
Fighting against a human rights violation that has been present across Latin America, the Argentinian grandmas share their 41-year experience.
I'm not walking away from this. I'm going to keep going to the grandma's house because every time we find a grandson for all of us. It is a joy and a celebration.
In the 4th anniversary of the students' disappearance, their parents will meet with President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador and his cabinet to discuss the creation of a committee for truth. Then they will march to the capital's base.
Still in Mexico, the entire police force in the coastal resort town of Acapulco is under investigation amid suspicions of it having been infiltrated by drug gangs. 2 commanders accused of murder were arrested, while the rest of the city's police have been disarmed. State police and the military will patrol the city instead. The latest polls in Brazil show the Workers' Party presidential candidate Fernando Haddad has been closing the gap against his far-right counterpart Jair Bolsonaro. According to the Ibope poll, Haddad's approval rate has increased to 22%, while Bolsonaro's stagnates at 28%. These numbers come ahead of the presidential election set for October 7th. Replacing the jailed former president, Luiz Ignacio Lula da Silva, Haddad would beat the former army captain in a runoff election.
The ticket changed just 13 days ago, and soon will be in first place. They think this is the work of one person, of 2 people. No, this is the result of a social mobilization that began with the redemocratization. We didn't start this campaign 13 days ago. We started it at the end of the military regime.
And a letter written by the former president, Luiz Ignacio Lula da Silva, expressing his support for Haddad, has been published on Twitter. The letter was written from his cell at the police headquarters in Curitiba. Lula said, quote, "I wasn't allowed to be a candidate and to be once again next to the people, but Haddad represents me. I have total trust in him, and he is going to make Brazil happy again with our vote." And with less than 2 weeks to go before the election, Brazilian women have organized a march in support of Haddad. On Tuesday, hundreds of women took to the streets in a march that promoted women's participation in politics. Haddad and his vice presidential candidate, Manuela de Avelia, spoke at the event. The activities coincide with a campaign planned for this weekend by women against the right-wing candidate, Jair Bolsonaro. They condemn his sexist comments and have started a campaign via social media called Ele Não, which means not him.
Since we arrived to power, the arrival of Lula represents also the arrival of woman to power, because after he came, the first woman president. We have extraordinary advance to the point that today women are the majority in post-graduation programs and others such as medicine. What it means is that we are building a part of this agenda, but it is not everything. We know that we have more tasks to fulfill.
Public transport is almost at a complete standstill in Argentina on the 2nd day of a general strike against the government. Trade unions have been marching through the capital city, Buenos Aires. Egado Esteban has the latest.
As the trade unions announced at a news conference, this general strike has exceeded all expectations. It really expresses how angry the Argentinian people are with these economic policies that are being implemented. It's like a holiday here in Buenos Aires, with almost nothing moving. This avenue is usually buzzing with buses and traffic, but none are running today. No buses, no trains, no metro, and no flights out of the main airports. So it is an expression of the widespread wish for the government to change its policies, while President Macri is renegotiating the terms of his $50 billion bailout deal with the IMF. Today, he met Christine Lagarde to talk about this. But we also saw the resignation of the head of the central bank, Luis Caputo, who is very close to Macri, precisely on the day that the president is negotiating with the IMF. So this powerful strike also has an impact on those differences within the government. So it's been an important day in the crisis here in Argentina.
Will El Salvador ever see justice for the Mozote massacre? Human rights organizations are demanding accountability on behalf of survivors and advocates who struggled for 57 years to get justice.
In December 1981, an army-led operation resulted in the massacre of about 1,000 men, women, and children in and around the rural hamlet of El Mozote. It happened at the beginning of the Salvadoran Civil War. The killings went unpunished because of an amnesty law, which was eventually lifted by the Supreme Court. Yet still, justice has been denied. This issue took center stage at the recent meeting held by Central American University and various human rights associations.
There have been already 43 witnesses. It is a huge massacre. I don't know when the judge is going to stop calling witnesses. The place where it happened has been thoroughly examined, and there will be possibly new exhumations at different locations.
The wounds are still fresh for survivors and victims' families.
11 people from my home died, plus about 50 other family members died too. In 1986, I went to Honduras. The scars were never closed. Those who ordered the daily attacks have never apologized to us.
In 1992, Argentine anthropologists exhumed remains, damning scientific evidence. It proved that the massacre was carried out by the Salvadoran army, acting on the state's orders.
They were defenseless children, and there was an explicit order by the armed forces to kill them all. History has to understand this. People need to understand and assume it, because otherwise it will happen again.
The justice system is supposed to punish criminal masterminds. Survivors and the victims of families are clinging to this hope. They say persons behind one of the worst massacres in modern Latin American history must not go unpunished.
In Bolivia, the United Nations Population Fund is teaming up with local groups to spread awareness about reducing teenage pregnancy. They're hoping to lower the high rate of unplanned pregnancies and maternal deaths within the country.
Although over the last 8 years, there's been only a 3% reduction in pregnancies in girls, 15 to 19. Bolivia still has one of the highest teen pregnancy rates in South America.
Between 7 and 17% of non-planned pregnancy are caused by sexual assault. Only 12% of teenagers and young people with active sexual life use some contraceptive method. Abortion is the third cause of maternal deaths.
Every year, both public and private sector interests have collaborated with social groups to raise awareness during Teenage Pregnancy Prevention Week. Despite these sustained efforts, over 240 babies are born to mothers under the age of 20 every day in Bolivia.
97% of teenage girls from urban areas and 83% from rural areas actually have access to contraception. Yet only 6.8% use protection during sex. We have to ask ourselves why they are not choosing to protect themselves.
Many teenagers are using unsafe, unreliable forms of contraception, with little or no effect. The rate of maternal death is also worrisome. Statistics show that in Bolivia, 160 women die per 100,000 childbirths. A high percentage of those mothers are girls under the age of 14.
A non-planned pregnancy during the adolescence constitutes a big challenge for teenage girls and their families. Pregnancy at this early age could be risky, and it could destroy their academic careers and their life goals.
According to the World Health Organization, every single day in Bolivia, close to 200 girls between 15 and 19 years old become pregnant. 70% of all pregnancies are unplanned, and a quarter of those are born to women between 12 and 18.
We'll take another short break now. Join us in a few.
An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says his country will respond to the unilateral actions of the United States, which threaten the future of the Iranian nuclear deal. And he added that the U.S. is welcome to renegotiate if they don't like the standing agreement.
Ladies and gentlemen, unlawful unilateral sanctions in themselves constitute a form of economic terrorism and a breach of the right to development. The economic war that U.S. has initiated under the rubric of new sanctions not only targets the Iranian people, but also entails harmful repercussions for the people of other countries.
And people in Tehran have reacted to Trump's speech, saying his comments are counterproductive.
What he said at the UN about supporting the Iranian nation is a sheer lie, because if it were really so, they would not have quit the JCPOA. The fact that he quit an international agreement, which the US government itself has seen before, showed that his word cannot be trusted. We are unable to trust and uphold talk with them.
And in other news from the UN General Assembly, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says the youth of his country are ready to take on the challenge of transforming Africa.
We are a young world where more than half the global population is under the age of 30 years. This is even more pronounced on our continent, Africa, where 2/3 of its people were not yet born when Nelson Mandela was released from 27 years of prison.
But on Tuesday, violence broke out at a protest in Cape Town. The demonstration was held against poverty, unemployment, corruption, violence, and crime in the city. A video uploaded to social media showed police firing stun grenades and water cannons at protesters. Protesters say South Africa needs faster economic growth to reduce its 27% unemployment rate. They also say poverty and inequality are stoking instability ahead of next year's general elections. Vietnamese leaders gathered in Hanoi on Wednesday to pay their respects to President Tran Dai Quang, who died on Friday. Quang's body is lying at the National Funeral Home in Hanoi for the public to come and pay their respects during a 2-day state funeral. The communist country's top leaders, including party chief Nguyen Phu Trong, Prime Minister Nguyen Giang Phuc, as well as other former leaders, paid tribute to Quang. Pope Francis says young Catholics are scandalized by the church's monstrous sexual abuse crisis. But he says church officials who tried to handle abusive priests many years ago should not be judged by today's standards. The Pope says long ago sexual abuse was covered up not only in the church but in homes because of shame. He says this is how people thought in the last century. The Pope adds that young people are scandalized by the hypocrisy of older people, war, incongruity, and corruption. And part of this corruption is sexual abuse.
But
as long as there's just one priest who abuses a boy or girl, this is monstrous because their man was chosen by God to bring children to heaven. I understand that young people are scandalized by such great corruption. They know it is everywhere, but in the church it is more of a scandal because they're supposed to bring children to God and not destroy them. In ancient times, these things were covered up. They were even covered up in homes. When an uncle raped a niece, when a father raped his children, it was covered up because it was an enormous shame. That was the mentality in the last centuries, in the last century.
And finally, U.S. TV personality and comedian Bill Cosby has been sentenced to between 3 and 10 years in prison for sexual assault. The once acclaimed star, famous for his role in The Cosby Show, was found guilty of 3 counts of indecent assault in April of this year. His sentence guarantees that Cosby will spend no less than 3 years behind bars before he becomes eligible for supervised release. And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you for watching.
Our actions have an impact on the environment.